One specific aspect about Fire Emblem that I feel sets it apart from the multitude of other franchises is the vast levels of care and detail that goes into the ensemble of individuals that exist within this universe. Please do not misunderstand me, as there are plenty of other properties that dedicate a considerable portion of their attention towards the cast as well. But Fire Emblem in particular I feel does it so frequently and effectively that I'd argue it has become a core part of the series' identity, gifting those fortunate enough to explore these electronic arts with a plethora of lovable lads and ladies, whether they be adorable, sassy, serene, badass, terrifying, hilarious, morally complex, or have an unhealthy obsession with this tenacious tactician. Fire Emblem, I'd say 95% of the time, hits a home run when it comes to crafting characters. Unfortunately, due to the process of elimination, the 5% that missed the mark tragically tarnished this IP's immaculate reputation more than the fanbase ever could. These characters, if you can call them that, failed to leave any sort of positive impact on the experience I have, along with a tenacious tendency of embodying some of the most aggravating attributes humanly possible. I warned you about this! In fact, some of them are so bad that I wouldn't think twice about letting them die so I don't have to read through their dreadful dialogue, with these 10 troglodytes being first in line for the electric chair. So join me everyone, as it's time for me to question why exactly Fire Emblem is one of my favourite Nintendo franchises, though this wouldn't be the first time, as I count down who I consider to be the top 10 absolute worst characters in all of Fire Emblem. For the sake of clarification, this video is purely opinion based, as aspects like characterization and personality traits being either endearing or abhorrent is highly subjective. So please don't think of this as the be-all end-all outline as to who the worst entities in Fire Emblem are. Also, if you just so happen to like any of these characters for whatever reasons, that's brilliant. I'm glad you're able to appreciate aspects of them that I can't. Additionally, I'd like to make it plain as day that how units function in game has absolutely no bearing on my choices, and because of that, all characters including NPCs are illegible. Plus, as I like to look at things from a multitude of perspectives, I won't shy away from the characteristics of each entry that I legitimately like, if there are any. Though that doesn't mean I won't hold back when ripping them a new arsehole, because I am going in deep. Oh, by the way, spoilers. Just in general. And with all that cleared up, it's time to bear witness to what one of my favourite franchises can pull out of its ass after having a long night of booze and bad decisions. And as someone who's seen what Fire Emblem has been through, especially in recent years, it is not a pretty sight. Barter, but only in Blazing Sword. I always find it fascinating to see how characters change over the course of multiple Fire Emblem games, and most of the time it works reasonably effectively, reflecting on the people they once were and striving to be the very best that they can. Or in Ashdod's case, turn out like this.
I could follow up on my arc in Path of Radiance and become a beacon of hope for all the young soldiers of Crimea fighting alongside us, in tandem with developing into possibly the most well-written character in Tellius. But I'd much rather throw it all away and degrade myself into a delusional servant who lacks behind this lazy layabout. What do you all think?
Typical response. While it's common for recurring applicants to debut in a more flawed form, Barter in Blazing Sword I felt to be a far cry from the beast of a man he is in Binding Blade, and one of the most nauseating nuisances to plague alive. And I don't say that lightly when he's featured in the same game as her.
Bow down to me!
Go fuck yourself!
Barter I summarize to be one of the most straightforward stalwarts in Fire Emblem, as his personality and support conversations center around the idea of becoming as strong as possible. Ironic considering he's one of the worst units in the game. Now this in of itself isn't a bad motivation, as the shonen genre does all the time to varying degrees of success. However, while those characters have a sense of charm outside of what drives them, I can't say the same for this muscle-bound moron, as not only is his dialect unspeakably boorish, that made reading his relations with the rest of the cast the most grating part of the game, but half the time no one wants anything to do with him and he just forces himself into their lives in an attempt to challenge them, to which he continuously fails. Next time, don't pick fights with those who are better than you, and by that I mean practically everyone. What I feel accentuates the issue is that Barter in Binding Blade is 100 times better. After all, his daunting demeanor remains intact, yet contains an aura of wisdom and pride that I felt made him very endearing. I know he's younger in Blazing Sword and meant to be rougher around the edges, but all that I perceive his past self to present is an insufferable amount of idiocy. Heck, Raven can't even comprehend his handwriting. God, I'd hate to imagine how much he'd trigger Maribel.
Wretched beast!
Barter I view to be not only a ghastly generic geezer, but also a terrible example of this particular archetype, especially as I can list two superior representatives, those being Sully and Effie, as both of these lavishing ladies are fueled by their desire to become stronger, but at no point do I feel they act in an overbearing or obnoxious manner. Plus, they have supplementary characteristics and personal connections to further their ambitions, whereas Barter the blockhead acts purely out of selfish desires, and frankly, if everything he does and everyone he talks to is purely for personal gain, then you, sir, deserve to have a wife who's one of the worst units in the series, because God knows you won't be able to best anyone else. Koren. Well, I'm fairly certain this surprised no one given how vocal I've been regarding my animosity for Kirito 2.0. Instead, you're probably pondering as to why on earth this heap of dragon dung is only at number 9. Well, truth be told, upon reflection and auxiliary inquiry, Koren isn't as bad as I initially made him out to be, along with later titles showing promise for the prince. But that being said, there's still so much I can't stand about this sensitive sibling, further compounded by the fact that such a ridiculous ratio of the cast treat him as the centre of their universe, especially my Norian wife.
Oh, there you are, darling. In case you're curious, I'm off to see my dear little Koren for the 5th time today. You're more than welcome to join me. Oh, I could talk about my adorable little baby brother for hours.
Ugh, I wonder if Kagero's single. With the premise of Fire Emblem Fates lending itself to the prospect of the greatest narrative in the entire series, execution being an entirely different can of worms, the setup for his character arc, how it could fluctuate depending on each pathway, is simply fantastic. Being adopted from a young age and sheltered all your life, only to later realize who your true family are and then being forced to pick a side with no going back, this I feel to be truly spectacular storytelling and could allow for so many ways for Koren's character to evolve. The only problem is he doesn't. Like, ever. The term bland, I'd argue, is too generous of a generalization for Koren, as his incredibly middle-of-the-road attitude and nauseating naivety makes it difficult for myself to connect with and by extension care about him, not helped by the fact that I'm subjected to his boring behaviour so frequently Rowan starts to look deep.
You have got to be kidding!
Because of what's at stake in Koren's history with both sides of the conflict, the notion that he could remain so unnaturally naive and expectant, I feel fails to engage in a relatable way and robs the narrative of all emotional weight and substance, if there was any to begin with. I don't know about you, but Koren could have kept his mouth shut during Birthright and Revelations, and as far as I'm concerned, the end result would be the same. Though regarding Conquest, I'll give the game some credit for actually making Koren question her morals, as well as having her deal with situations where she's powerless to act, so at least there was some semblance of growth present in this pathway. However, much of that amounts to nothing when factoring in just how fucking stupid this adopted imbecile acts from time to time, so make of it what you will. The supports didn't help much either, as despite being able to converse with every character in the game, I perceive that roughly 3/4 of the quarrels are merely used as an excuse for the army members to explain to Koren who they are and their reason for being here. And don't misconstrue me, as many of Robin's supports went in the same direction. However, I felt that not only did the discussions have significantly more natural and free-flowing dialogue, but additionally demonstrated a tendency to cause both characters to grow and establish a meaningful friendship, whereas Koren's group chat I always felt to be very forced, with some of them going absolutely nowhere and others being downright stupid. Oh yes, Hannah, of course it's Koren's fault we got kidnapped, because naturally an infant would have no trouble fighting off this giant of a man and his additional forces. Yes, and at the same time, I'm was to blame for Celica being held hostage. Who is responsible for overseeing these interactions? I was, sir. Not anymore. Much of my complaints about Koren have been addressed in past videos, so why exactly is an individual I've shown extensive animosity towards only at number 9? Well, truth be told, when I feel a Koren support is done well, I believe it to be brilliant, and usually displays a much more mischievous and funny side of Koren, which I find highly refreshing. However, my primary source of appreciation stems from Fire Emblem Warriors. This is where I'd argue Koren really shines due to her acting in the more supportive role instead of being the main focus, emphasizing her upbeat and cheerful side, as she's often the voice of hope that helps to rally everyone's spirits and make the best out of a bad situation, which extends to her supports where she sees the best in everyone and is ever so sweet in a way that didn't feel patronizing or abnormal. Unfortunately, the damage has already been done by this dullard of a dragon, and though time has healed some of those wounds, I'm afraid this boring bag of barf still leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. Faye. Holy crap, first Koren isn't in the top 5, but now Faye too? Yes, as shocking as it is, even I couldn't bring myself to put Faye at the very bottom. For though I still think she's the worst 3DS era character that isn't an NPC, to the point where I'm one more arm away from pulling the trigger, I can't deny the few glimmers of glee that manifest from this little lady, that far outweighs the vast volumes of vomit that make up the remaining 7 entries. Honestly, I'm really starting to wonder why on earth I even like Fire Emblem if things can get worse than Faye, in tandem with all the other crap I've been subjected to. Perhaps I should just give up and look for other games to play.
Stay with me.
And all is forgiven. Among the few new faces that ventured to Valentia exclusively for Echoes, Faye is introduced at the very beginning of the story as one of the villagers Arm grew up with, and let's just say I didn't feel she hit the ground running. It's no stretch to recapitulate Faye's entire reason for being with one word: Alm. No joke peeps, everything, and I mean everything, Faye does or thinks about is fixated around the hero of Valentia, which in her defense isn't exactly out of place given how many soldiers are starstruck by the young farm boy. However, outside of their awe and admiration, I felt each of these individuals had depth, charm, and were interesting people, none of which are aspects I can attribute to Faye. Since so much of her screen time involves Arm, Faye is a character that got worryingly infuriating inexorably quickly. As she sounded like such a broken record, I'd be happy to listen to Flame Hineyard instead. Oh fuck no, go back to the Arm-obsessed atrocity! Plus, most of the time, her obsession I felt wasn't justified, with her supports only serving to make things 50 shades of shit. When talking to Arm, much of her dialogue came off as either out of place or downright desperate, with Arm clearly not validating the same level of interest, and let us not forget her Silk support showcasing how hostile Faye is towards others for downright moronic reasons, and by the end she never gets over Arm or learns to move on. Man, I feel sorry for the poor sap who married her.
So how'd you get over
Well, son, as you grow older, you'll find that the hurt fades away. Why? Why don't you love me?
For what it's worth, Faye I don't think does anything awful aside from shutting out Silk. And she certainly looks like a sweetheart, I'll give her that. But man, does her Arm session rub me the wrong way, and make her about as interesting as most of the map design. And I know there's the counter-argument that Camilla and Faja behave the same way, so why do they get a free pass? Well, it's simple, really. Camilla and Faja I'd argue to have established personality traits of being doting yet dangerous, and callous yet curious respectively. Plus, though the majority of their conversations do involve the Avatar, more so in the case of Camilla, not all of them do. Heck, they've actually gone out of their way to help others and shown other sides of their personality, aspects I noticed to be abundantly absent when analysing Faye. And when a character will only converse about a singular topic of discussion, I'd be better off pressing the mute button. God knows nothing worthwhile is coming out of her mouth. Garen. Fire Emblem Fates is arguably the most divisive game in the franchise due to the enormous amounts of hype leading up to its release, followed by the many questionable choices present within the final product. I'm sorry, in what fucked up universe would someone think of this as fun? I myself happen to love Fate, Conquest specifically, but I won't for a second deny that the game failed to deliver here and there, among which the King of North Garen I felt to be the biggest letdown since No Man's Sky, and arguably the worst villain in the entire franchise. And trust me, this series is no stranger to shitty scoundrels, though I'm just grateful after Awakening and Fate's Echoes really picked up the slack.
What a pathetic display!
Fire Emblem 14 wastes no time in demonstrating how demonic the King of North is. After all, his design alone shows that he is not one to be trifled with, and as early as the second chapter, he shows his true colours by forcing Koren to kill the prisoners, even going so far as to try and annihilate his underlings for disobeying orders. Christ, I've heard of strict parenting, but this is ridiculous. I'd hate to see what happens during dinner time.
Peter, could you please pass the potato?
Ah, damn it, Meg!
Garen doesn't exactly shine very brightly, and unfortunately he only gets dimmer as each narrative moves forward. From start to finish, Garen remains a miserable old asshole that lacks any sort of villainous charm or sadistic satisfaction, coming off as incredibly boring to me while simultaneously showing no signs of depth or intrigue regarding his motivations. Throughout all three storylines, Garen doesn't really do much and is relegated to just barking orders, all the while being undermined and manipulated by the likes of Iago and even his own children, causing me to observe Garen as rather incompetent given how regularly his words fall on deaf ears, in addition to his minimal involvement in the actual war effort. His behaviour I find to be equally bewildering, and he's so quick to sentence Koren to death, yet half the time nothing comes of it, causing me to contemplate why on earth everyone's so scared of him in the first place.
Xander, I order you to kill Koren.
No.
Well, I'm out of ideas.
All the incremental evidence I put forth should suffice as to why Garen is such an awful Fire Emblem villain, but the sad part is I could have easily seen him as becoming one of the best. An issue occasionally addressed by the Noриan siblings is that Garen used to be a respected and dignified king, someone who is tough but fair, to the point where Xander incessantly idolizes him despite the concerning change of heart. Now this I find to be a great premise for a villain, as it makes the circumstances far more tragic, given that this formerly magnanimous man has become a shell of his previous prime, and how desperate Koren and the other siblings hold on to the belief that he'll see the error of his ways. However, the game forgets to show off the type of pristine person he was so much as once. What, were they busy programming Pokemon to me? Get your goddamn priorities straight! Never does the game so much as attempt to reconcile Garen, and at most, some supports outlined a few times he was a flawed but overall nice man, but never are they the focus of said supports or give insight as to his slow descent into madness. So what I'm left with is a malicious monarch that fails to supplement any sort of substance. I'm not saying every Fire Emblem villain has to be super deep or complex, but if that's going to be the case, at the very least do what they did with Narcian and Petrine and make them so deliciously diabolical that I love to hate them so, instead of leaving me as miserable as the people under Garen's rule. For all his faults, however, I honestly don't think he's the most worthless windbag the 3DS Fire Emblem games have shat out. In fact, the next numbnuts is a real shit show that goes by the name of Validol. You know something? As much as I hate Garen, and rightfully so, I can at least admire his fear-inducing presence and the idea they had going for him, so I don't think he's the worst 3DS era Fire Emblem character. That award goes to this motherfucker. Validol to me is the textbook definition of lame. Well, not only does he lack any sort of inquisitor's appeal, intimidation factor, or interesting backstory, but I viewed him to do little to nothing for our Awakening's 3 story arcs, and half the time was brushed aside like an absolute joke. I mean, give Garen some credit, people actually feared him and he was on screen quite a bit, whereas this Disney reject is about as effective as Brawl Ganondorf, and if that's not a one-sided battle, I don't know what is. Validol suffers from most of the problems I had with the previous entry, not being threatening in the slightest along with failing miserably at his missions and going down like a little bitch, twice in fact, lacking any sort of enjoyable personality traits, a design I discerned to be downright silly, with motivations that are about as basic as you can get, which I felt made him feel like nothing more than a pesky nuisance that only serves to waste time. Speaking of wasting time, Validol spends very little of it in the game, and even when he does decide to appear, not much comes of it. Plus, every time something doesn't go his way, he breaks down and starts panicking like a chicken with his head cut off, which for a man who's meant to be the one to resurrect the fell dragon Grima, is pretty damn pathetic. For what it's worth, the remaining Awakening villains aren't much better since honestly I'm not too fond of them myself, but at the very least they had elements I admired disregarding their support conversations. Aversa felt like much more of an underlying threat, Warheart did an impressive job of being an imposing obstacle, and Gangrel was not only memorable with his theatrics but also had an understandable motivation for causing conflict. If you had to twist my arm to find something good about Validol, at the very least I'll admit his ability to possess Robin does give him a degree of danger, and using it to murder Crom in the future demonstrates that he means business. However, on the current timeline, that doesn't happen, instead allowing Basilio to have a good laugh at his expense. And you know what? I'm right there with him, as Validol to me is literal hot air, offering nothing of substance and only serving to sour the experience, making this flavourless fuckface, in my opinion, the worst character to be fashioned from the 3DS line of Fire Emblem games. And yet somehow he's the one that made it into Fire Emblem Warriors. I wonder how the other rascals reacted to this news.
Greetings, lesser beings. I thought I'd inform you that I'm going to be the one to represent our kind in Fire Emblem Warriors. Feel free to thank me whenever you please. After all, I'm far more worthy of this honor than the rest of you sorry saps.
Get that motherfucker!
Meg. I believe those of us who played Radiant Dawn can agree that the Dawn Brigade are the most criminally undeveloped cast in the franchise, primarily due to the game shifting perspectives so often, I swear I was playing Sonic 06, along with intelligence systems having the genius idea of implementing the worst support system imaginable. Because who needs character development? The fuck do you think this is, a Fire Emblem game? At the very least, I detected each member of the Dawn Brigade to be given an understandable motivation for fighting in this continental conflict and a decent backstory. That is, except for the dreary dolt known as Meg, who though not nearly as offensive or insulting as specific scoundrels, instead acts as probably the most pointless character Fire Emblem has ever created, who amounts to absolute zero, though it's reassuring to know that Fire Emblem has its own version of Yamcha. Meg's personality, if you could call it that, is of a shy but essentially harmless and rather sweet girl, so I don't think she's a downright unlikable character. Predominantly because she's not much of one to begin with. Meg's dialogue is conspicuously limited, and whenever she decides to speak up, very little of what she said I felt had actual weight behind it. I mean, yeah, she's Brom's daughter and there's that stupid romantic subplot with Zihark, but not only does that go nowhere, she at no point displays a rational incentive for being a part of, and by extension sticking with the Dawn Brigade. In fact, the only reason Meg's here is because apparently the team needed an armor unit, which Aaron does more effectively than her. It makes me wonder why Sophie didn't get rid of Meg ages ago.
Wait a minute. These are your base stats? What the heck is wrong with you? We already have enough crappy candidates to begin with.
I'm just trying to fit in.
Get out! Get out of this house! I said no!
I might be coming off as comparatively harsh towards Meg, as honestly she doesn't do much to warrant such hatred, but what really ticks me off is how embarrassingly irrelevant she is. I mean, at least Faye and Koren felt like they belonged in the story, and though Garen and Validol are awful, they are tied to the main narrative, whereas Meg is about as pointless as Mokuba both on and off the battlefield, and it makes me contemplate her conception in the first place, though to be fair, there's a lot I question in regards to Radiant Dawn. Why did they do this to you? At the end of the day, Meg I wouldn't declare to be a bad person and doesn't do anything outwardly offensive, which is a result of her not doing anything at all and incapable of making the limited time she has available to her meaningful. And before this tangent goes on any longer, I might as well just bite the bullet and say what we're all thinking.
What's that, Blazing Knight?
Shut up, Meg.
Desmond. Following in the footsteps of the tried and true anime cliche, Fire Emblem doesn't have the best track record when it comes to father figures. To be fair, Grell's a great guy, broken back notwithstanding, and Elbert's cool, but Marth and Chrom didn't have the best role models, Garen isn't winning Father of the Year anytime soon, and all the males from Fate I find to be just as guilty.
What's that? Leave my child in a pocket dimension to grow into an adult by themselves and barely visit in order to give them the love and care that they sorely need? What could possibly go wrong? Damn it, Kiragi, this is all your fault!
While many of these deadbeat dads have their issues, I don't have to think twice about giving the award for worst parent in Fire Emblem to the king of Burn, Desmond. Because while it's one thing to be a tyrant and or evil backstabber, it's something else entirely to be a petty little shit that'll kill off their own kin out of spite, more so when said kin only seeks your approval and not self-satisfaction, because God knows if you're not happy, no one else is allowed to be. Desmond was funny enough mentioned in Binding Blade when Guinevere recounts how Zephyr became the way he was, explaining that Zephyr was born for purely political reasons and thus was never truly accepted by his father, further compounded by Zephyr's skills far exceeding that of the king's, causing the jealousy within him to reach the point of trying to eradicate the young lad, only through his own flesh and blood to get his own back and transform him into the monstrous maniac you see before you. Though considering he's my third favourite Fire Emblem villain, I don't know whether to be horrified or happy concerning this outcome. This brief description of Desmond isn't exactly painting the best picture in my mind, but Blazing Sword makes everything as clear as day, as I witness firsthand just how cruel and trivial he really is. Now I'm going to level with you for a minute because I can understand the type of jealousy Desmond is undergoing, since both games point out that he's as average of a human being as possible, and since Zephyr is practically a prodigy, I can sympathise with the frustrations of how others are naturally just better than you no matter how hard you try. However, here's where I take issue with Desmond. Not only is Zephyr humble about his talent and doesn't ever talk back to his father, but the reason he's such an outstanding upstart is precisely because he wants his father's approval. I could sort of get behind Desmond's hatred if Zephyr pointed out how much better of a king he would be and rubbed it in his face, but that is not what transpires between the two, so all Desmond amounts to is a resentful little shit who's bad because a child can do his job better than him. I mean, as bad as Garen got, he at the very least acknowledged when Koren did something well and wasn't one to shy away from complimenting his children for their victories, and it really says something when you make Garen seem like the good guy.
God, you are a self-righteous prick!
Desmond has all but taken the crown for the biggest piece of shit predecessor in Fire Emblem, further solidified by him not only losing the Fire Emblem so Zephyr won't be coronated, plotting the prince's assassination on top of that, and even once Zephyr's mother Helene, who is partially to blame for Desmond's hatred, actively wants to bring the family together and have them all live happily, Desmond still tries to murder his son. Good lord, you are the type of person I hate the most, the kind that act like arseholes purely out of vindictiveness, doubly so towards a family member who in no way shows any ill will towards them. Truth be told, Desmond may not be as ostensibly appalling as Garen and Validol, however his actions really irritate me and is the kind of cold-hearted cunt I cannot stand. Plus, I'm sure Eliwood would have a thing or two to say about him. I mean, he already gave Helene a mouthful, God knows how he'd react to Zephyr's zealous of a father.
You are a worthless, friendless, faggot-lipped little piece of shit, you fucking weepy willow shit sack!
Rorts and Arkard. When the situation begins to look bleak, it's usually in the army's best interest to call for retreat, and I've witnessed this display of preservation plenty of times throughout the series, from both our heroes and villains, though I'm pretty sure Ashdod has never heard of the word.
Sire, the Crimean army is almost upon us. We must retreat to save the Dain bloodline.
Bah! Those idiots stand no chance against me! Come, brave fools, I'll fucking have ya! Maybe this was a mistake?
Gee, what gave you that idea?
While I personally wouldn't consider retreat an act of cowardice if it means saving the lives of your comrades in arms, when one seeks to help themselves at the expense of everyone else, that to me is unforgivable. And oh man, am I have a hard time finding anything positive to say about these two pipsqueaks. What I found funny about Rorts and Arkard is that they're actually featured frequently during Binding Blade, despite not being major villains or even hailing from Burn, as Arkard is in charge of the mining operations in the Western Isles where because of him, people are literally worked to death. How lovely. And Rorts is just a greedy old fuck. Initially, they don't seem like much, just a bunch of money-grubbing aristocrats. Yet the reason they end up sticking around for so long is that firstly, they sell out the King of Euphoria and side with Burn, because apparently loyalty is something they laugh at. And secondly, they are the biggest bunch of cowardly fucks this side of those players who sit in the corner and spam Hadouken till the cows come home. In spite of siding with the enemy, the moment cracks start to appear in Burn's forces, they turn tail and run away before the battle even begins, often making the dumbest of excuses for sitting out each skirmish, and even going so far as to ask the women generals to clean up their messes. I mean, the nerve of them to ask the leaders of Burn something as ludicrous as that! They even run out on Douglas and leave him to face the Lycian League all by himself, though that was probably a smart move considering who they were going up against. While these cash-courting chickens don't do half of the shocking shit other Fire Emblem villains are capable of, their perplexingly pathetic performance throughout the plot makes me despise these sniveling rodents tenfold, and I just cannot comprehend the tripe that they are capable of coughing up. In fact, just about all the cast members that have the displeasure of interacting with these two dirtbags don't shy away from how incompetent each idiot is, and even when you face them head on, they continue to act like a bunch of crybabies and linger to the belief that things will always go their way, and it's at this point where any shred of respect I had for them turned to dust faster than the King of Wakanda, and frankly, I don't want anything to do with them anymore. Thankfully, the lovely little Alina is here to deliver the much needed reality check.
Say hello to my phone for me, fuck nuggets!
Izuka. With the fundamentals of most if not all Fire Emblem narratives being based around war, there are many times throughout the series where the chronicles can get rather dark and characters do some truly disgusting deeds. God damn it, Brakut Renee didn't deserve this! Rest assured, I don't feel it ever gets berserk levels of dismal, but that doesn't change the fact that sometimes Fire Emblem can be kinda fucked up, and this fiend is perhaps the most calamitous creature to plague the continent of Tellius. And even when looking past his unforgivable atrocities, Izuka I found to be so annoying, he can, as Toreno puts it, test the patience of a stone, and is an utterly useless Ursine. I swear, if it wasn't for Peleus, Soph would have killed him before part 2, and the world would be all the better for it. During the two Tales of the Tellius series, there are many murky moments displayed during each game. Grail's death, Ashnod's murder of his father, the Heron massacre, and the fact that the citizens of Crimea are a bunch of racist pricks. Izuka is an individual who is responsible for possibly the worst occurrence ever, that being the creation of the Feral Ones. For those who are unaware, Feral Ones are the result of a drug being used on the goose that shortens their lifespan significantly, and corrupts and warps their minds to the point where all they can do is fight until they die, and this happens to hundreds of the poor creatures throughout both games. This act of mutilation against the goose is a crime against nature, and by itself should suffice as to why he's one of the worst characters in the series. In fact, the exact same drug is used on Bjork like Alentia's Uncle Renning and fellow party member Morin. But what makes this magnitude of monstrosity worse is that the mastermind behind these abominations not only thinks of his work as a stroke of genius, the same way EA thought that microtransactions in Battlefront 2 would be a good idea, but is also one of the most idiotic, unbearable, and annoying atrocities I've witnessed in all of fiction, to the point where even Jar Jar Binks starts to become tolerable. Izuka's speech pattern and mannerisms are so eccentric and disjointed I swear he's either tripping balls or having a psychotic episode half the time, making him difficult for myself to endure for more than 5 seconds, more so when he throws temper tantrums like a toddler every time something goes wrong, which happens a lot as he's also a shit strategist and is constantly contradicted at every turn. I mean, just listen to the extent of his knowledge and try not to slam your face into the nearest flat surface.
Here's my genius scheme. First, we shall target Talrega.
Talrega's no good. There are floods this time of year.
I see. Well then, we shall poison the water supply.
And risk the lives of our comrades and all the innocent villagers? No way! What other words of wisdom do you intend to embarrass yourself with?
Embarrass myself? What on earth are you suggesting? You're just jealous because I know that Amelia is the best unit in Sacred Stones.
Yeah, Seth would have something to say about that.
Mounted units serve no purpose in Fire Emblem 4.
I can't begin to imagine how you came to that conclusion.
Har is useless in Radiant Dawn.
Hearing that physically hurt me.
Lyn is the strongest Fire Emblem Lord.
Oh. So you're one of those fanboys.
Bantu is amazing in New Mystery of the Emblem.
No. Christ, is there anything else you can say that verifies how malfunctioning your mind is?
Luck is the best stat?
You'd think after all that it couldn't get any worse. But no, Izuka never once shows any sort of remorse or empathy for what he's done. All that matters to him is his work, and he doesn't care who or what is harmed in the process. He doesn't have an end goal, any sort of backstory, even the decency to come up with a semi-competent plan of action. He's just a disease, a festering pile of pus that spreads like a virus to those who come into contact with him, and is accountable for the most terrible of transgressions in all of Fire Emblem. And as far as I'm concerned, the scars this monster left behind will never heal. Along with the fact that he's not even my number one pick for the worst character there is, for I feel the fuckface most deserving of that title is none other than... Macca Love. You know what? I'm not gonna beat around the bush. Fuck this guy. Seriously, fuck him with a forged rider's bane, I hate him so much. every Fire Emblem character has their flaws, there's no doubt about that, and I've showcased many miscreants who are substantially less positives than negatives. But holy fuck does Macca Love not only have no redeeming qualities, but also makes life worse for all those around him, especially his poor sister Marcia. Granted, the Fire Emblem villains have done worse things for sure, but they're the bad guys, so I'm supposed to hate them. Whereas Macca Love is meant to be an ally, yet he continually acts like a drunken layabout who never learns his lesson and practically spits in the face of others. In fact, he's the only unit I would willingly let die during Fire Emblem playthroughs. Oh yeah, I hate this fuck nugget that much, and oh boy am I going to have a field day explaining why. As the older brother of his splendid sister Marcia, you'd think Macca Love would have personality traits similar to this pristine Pegasus Knight, but the only thing these two have in common is that they have pink hair and hate being in the presence of one another, though in Marcia's case, it's perfectly warranted, as Macca Love is an absolute buffoon. This lazy oaf spends all of his time drinking and gambling until he's run out of booze and bullion, forever finding himself in debt to others which his sister always has to deal with, as well as constantly making excuses to get out of work at any and all opportunities. Though in Radiant Dawn he's better off not working considering how much he sucks colossal Crimean cock. Understandably so, Marcia isn't exactly happy about this, and neither is the likes of Ike and the rest of the team, as no matter how much they try to ram the message into his thick skull, he never takes the hint and has the audacity to act like a douche to those trying to be nice to him. Take his support with Ashdod for example, where she explains that she doesn't have any money for him after giving it away. He starts being a total dick to her, the sleazy bastard, and when she does give him a family heirloom to sell, he only gives it back because his sister demanded he do so, and once he becomes a Crimea Royal Knight and is tasked with keeping the peace and stopping rebellion, he proceeds to act like an utter moron and somehow gets away with it. It really makes me wish he worked in the Bennion army, because God knows Tanner would have none of his shit.
Status.
It's no good, Skipper. I don't know the codes.
Don't give me excuses. Give me results.
As I don't want things to get too out of hand, I'll reluctantly give Macca Love some credit, that at the very least he admits he's a loser and doesn't try to pretend he's something he's not. Plus, his support with Bastion isn't too bad in all honesty. But what really ticks me off about Macca Love and why he's my least favourite Fire Emblem character is that despite being featured in 2 games, he never, ever changes. You may have noticed a pattern concerning the candidates for this list, but one of my biggest problems with any character is when they don't ever grow or change in the slightest, even if that character isn't particularly flawed, as I feel this serves to sever their humanity and leave them as one-note pieces of plastic that are perfectly content being the same stick of fucks from the get-go. But even the likes of Faye and Barter did start to come around by the end of the A support, even if it was just slightly, so at the very least there was an attempt to develop them further, which is more than I can say for this miserable mercenary. Not only that, but even if a character steps on stage with many glaring issues, some of which are far worse than what Macca Love did upon his arrival, such as Jafar, Shinon, Jill, Tharja, Takumi, and Perry, as long as they acknowledge their fault and start to make an effort to turn themselves around, I can accept that, and I feel it makes a world of difference, often leading to some truly terrific tenets. I mean, for God's sake, Vegeta is one of the greatest characters in anime precisely because he starts off so bad and over the course of the series changes into the person he is now. The point is, regardless of how much baggage the occupant in question carries around with them, I'd argue there should always be a point where they start to become a better person and learn from their mistakes, even if it's only a small step in the right direction. Macca Love, however, only seeks to dig his drunken ass further into the grave of how much of a fool he makes of himself, and relentlessly reassures why he's the worst being on the planet, all of which I would proclaim to be summarized in this one conversation where Marcia has reached her breaking point and is practically in tears because of the stress he causes to the entire family. Macca Love then says he'll clean up his act and start taking responsibility for his actions, and it looks like after seeing his sister become so distraught, he's finally ready to move forward. Well, that's great. All seems well, and Macca Love can start his journey towards becoming a better person. So how does he completely ruin the moment? Say Marcia, you want to bet how long I can keep my promise? I'll give you 4 to 1 odds.
Motherfucker! What an asshole! God damn it! Son of a bitch! You idiot!
Okay, that does it. I could tolerate the drinking. I could tolerate the gambling. I could tolerate you being an idiot and a sleazeball. I could even tolerate the fact that Ashley turned out the way she is because of you. Actually, no I can't, but the point still stands. I will not, I repeat, not sit by and let you spit in your sister's face after promising to finally clean up your act, and there's only one way to deal with a piece of shit like you. And as luck would have it, Marcia has been kind enough to do the deed in my place.
Goodbye, Macca Love, and good riddance, you good-for-nothing, pink-haired, limp dildo fuckface!
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Macca Love is, in my opinion, the absolute worst character Fire Emblem has ever produced. I mean, sure, he hasn't committed some of the offences of other party members, and can get the occasional laugh once in the blue moon, but to witness this putrid pansy relentlessly deteriorate the well-being of others, and continue to do so without ever once trying to clean up his act, or even further establish his family life outside of how much of a burden he is the type of person who will get no sympathy from me, which is why he takes the #1 spot as my pick for the worst Fire Emblem character of all time. This has been Blazing Knight. I wish you all a great night, take care, and though Fire Emblem doesn't always bring its A game when it comes to creating characters, and some turn out to be a total train wreck, more often than not, this series hits a home run with its host and makes it one of the most compelling and emotional franchises I've had the pleasure of playing. I only hope that Three Houses causes the love within my heart to grow stronger than ever. Thank you all for watching today. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed the video. Please be sure to give this video a like and tell me what you thought in the comments, as well as what you think are the worst Fire Emblem characters of all time. And please do not hold back in explaining why. I'd also like to say a very big thank you to Sean Reviews 22, Gal Got Games, Chris Digital Dreams, Brent Matthews, Gan RPG, Cody Anderson, Savior Dragon for the Win, Tiffany Chan 123, RNG Gumi, Angel Evilish, Ape 392, and Maggie Full for providing the voice in this video. I couldn't have done it without you guys and girls, so thank you all so much. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, follow me on Twitter, Discord and Amino, and if you would like to go the extra mile and receive some additional bonuses for doing so, please consider donating to my Patreon to help make these videos possible. And speaking of which, I want to say a massive thank you to all my patrons who help make these videos possible. I know I say this all the time, but it really does mean the world to me that you help support my work and make these videos possible. I can't do any of this without you, so thank you so much. I love you all. And I'd like to give special shout outs to Alex, Chaos Saberlight, Christian Alonz, Dancing Dragon Games, Justin Konovich, Vanessa Westfall, Vincent Clark, Midnight Castle, Patanko Fan 32, Maggie Fall, Arkarai, Jeremy Renninger, The Main Idea, and Ape 392. Thank you all so much. You people are just so awesome on so many levels. Anyway, that's it from me. I'll see you all next time.